Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340.
This is the voice of atheism in Florida here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Ed Golly with Jim Peterson in studio, where you can offer up your opinion on the program. Pick up the phone and call 441-3000, and we'll even send you, on request, your very own Get Out of Hell free card for your very own. It's transferable. Also, you can insult an atheist for $2. Well, normally we talk about state-church separation and why we reject religion here on the Atheist Forum, but I happen to be in agreement with 2016 presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, who claimed and stated that he thought the most significant problem we face is climate change. And because of that, we've invited Kent Bailey to join us in studio today. Kent is the chair of the Tampa Bay Sierra Club. I'll tie religion in with it as well as I can. As I understand it, the pilot of the first 737 that crashed, when he realized that they were in serious trouble, prayed for a miracle. It didn't happen, and 189 people died. So we can't pray our way out of the climate issues that we're dealing with. We need to actually address them head on and deal with them at the same time that we see the politicians that run our state and our federal government believe that the best way to deal with a problem this significant is to simply pretend that it doesn't exist and ignore it out of existence. That's not going to happen, is it, Kent?
Ed, thank you for having me here. No, it certainly isn't going to happen, but to go back to your religious theme, let me tell you that for climate denial is something of a religious belief for the practitioners of that particular, I will call it religion, insofar as they maintain their
obfuscation of the issue?
Yeah. You know, the science is very clear on this, yet climate deniers will insist that there is room for doubt and that there is a lack of scientific consensus. This simply isn't the case. It's a belief that they cling to in the face of obvious factual contradictions. Yes. So, but thank you for having me be here.
So we're not looking at a bunch of scientists trying to garner up grants to make faux studies so they can get another grant the next year and do it again. In fact, if they did, it seems like they'd come up with the opposite conclusion, that the evidence is inconclusive and we'll need to do another study again next year. But that's not what they're telling us.
Yeah, the science is very clear. Climate change is real. It's here. It's happening now. And it is something that we're going to have to cope with. We're going to see it in all manner of impacts today, but you know, tragically, the most serious impacts will not be felt by our generation. It will be the next generation yet to be brought onto this planet that really is going to be suffering from our lack of action.
Unless, of course, you happen to be a former resident of Mexico Beach, Florida, in which case you have felt the consequences. Would you agree? Because of the 2-degree temperature rise in the Gulf? That turned what would have been nothing more than a tropical depression into a level 4.95 hurricane?
The behavior of hurricanes has changed now because the forces that drive them, the difference between the temperature of the water and the temperature of the air is now greater and is causing rapid intensification of storms, the likes of which we haven't seen before. It's turning storms into rain machines, such as was visited on Houston, where we had 4 feet of rain, unprecedented. This is just something that's never happened before. During that same year, we saw the longest lasting major storm ever tracked by science. There's no the storms now are taking different trajectories than they've taken in the past. It's going to be a major issue going forward, and it's you're seeing it reflected in insurance rates. You will see banks redlining coastal properties and refusing to put mortgages out for coastal properties. planners and people that are responsible for implementing growth management policies are debating this on a daily basis. I attended a meeting yesterday where the idea that we were at some point going to have to retreat from the shoreline was taken a priori. Nobody disputed that. What was under consideration was what policies do we implement today that will make that retreat in the future less expensive, less burdensome. We know that day is going to come, but what should we be doing today to minimize the exposure of the local governments that these people were representing to cost for trying to maintain infrastructure of all kinds in the face of rising seas and worsening climate disasters.
And while this this retreat is an aspect of the life we have to live today, it is also something that in the future could turn to a complete rout as the sea levels rise in, say, 75 or 100 or 150 years, whatever it is. It's unclear and uncertain as yet, but we know for sure that this will be a problem ultimately, and it could result in large amounts of the land area of the Earth being inundated with seawater, including the entire state of Florida.
That will take a long time.
It will. It won't be in our generation, but still.
What will take a lot less time is the first 6 feet of sea level rise will take out 12.5% of our homes, and it will be the most valuable, most expensive homes that we have in Florida, and that is something that we will, I believe, most certainly see before the end of this century.
6.5 feet?
Yes. Well, here's Dr. Andrea Dutton, University of Florida, measured 4.5 inches over a 5-year period from the years 2011 through 2015 inclusive. This is not a projection. This is data. This is actual measurements of the water coming up. And so when you're going to see 0.9 of an inch per year maintained over a 5-year period, the idea that we're going to wind up with a total of 2 or 3 feet by the end of the century is just untenable.
So in 15 years, that would be a foot.
Yes.
But you use the word maintained. Couldn't it happen at a rate that would be considered geometric progression?
That's exactly what's expected. And the most conservative sea level rise projections are simply extrapolating. They take where we are today, they look back 20 years, draw a line forward from those 2 points, and they come up with something like a couple of feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. And that's just not what's happening.
Yeah.
There are things we can do. We need to have smarter development policies. We need to recognize the fact that when we allow people to build homes on properties where they enjoy the benefits of civil infrastructure provided by local government, the local government is then taking on the obligation to maintain that infrastructure, as was upheld in Jordan versus St. John's in the 5th District recently. The local governments are, I don't want to say in a panic state, but they're certainly scrambling to understand what kind of policies they can put into place to avoid either having to condemn and compensate for market value these properties that are going to be increasingly difficult to provide with every kind of civil service that their taxes support.
But the court case you cited then, as I understand it, the community, the government, argued that they did not have a responsibility to provide infrastructure for endangered areas, and the court overruled them and said, yes, you do.
The homeowner maintained that as he had a deed, which is basically a contract between the property owner and the issuing authority, and as he had paid his property taxes, that the local government was obligated to maintain the infrastructure that gave his property value, and the court did agree.
Wow. So when these communities simply run out of money, The mayor may be spending a few weekends in jail. I don't know, but they can't do what they can't do.
Barrier Island communities are at some point going to be looking at a situation where the revenue in property taxes from coastal properties is going to fall far short of the cost of maintaining infrastructure to them. And at some point, this will be recognized by the real estate industry, and it will have a devastating effect on property values in Florida.
Well, the extreme of that, of course, is Mexico Beach, right, where you have no infrastructure anymore. So how? Excuse me, Jim, but how can that municipal government be charged with reconstructing the infrastructure when they have no income because the property owners have no businesses and income to provide the taxes or pay the property taxes on homes that don't exist? Isn't that sort of an extreme of what's really going to happen at a slower pace, but it's still the same thing?
Of course. That was a disaster, so you will get disaster relief. But it's not limited to Florida. It's not limited to hurricanes. There's a community I heard about on the news on the way over here that has been severely impacted by the flooding. I think this was in Nebraska, and they have borrowed already, in the face of the flood, more money than their entire annual budget just to cover short-term impacts of the flooding that they've experienced. There, and again, this catastrophe, these kind of consequences, they're not going to happen next year or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but they're coming. And when you allow development in areas where you shouldn't be allowing development, and you know that 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, this property is not going to be it's not going to be sustainable, you're assuming a risk as a local government, and it's irresponsible for government officials to be putting all taxpayers on the hook to bail out these coastal properties.
And it's not just about the financial and legal arrangements, but the physical arrangements as well. One thing that is an item of controversy around here is beach replenishment. And rebuilding sand beaches, which is a large part of, let's say, Mexico Beach, for instance, the reason why people go there. The world now faces a global sand shortage, such that the making of concrete has become increasingly expensive. And you might think that there's a lot of sand out there. There's the Sahara Desert and places like that. But actually, there's just a certain kind of sand that is suitable for a lot of the uses that people have for it. And that's in increasingly small availability. So that's and there are other kinds of material problems that are associated with it too. Timber, for instance, is becoming in short supply. There's all kinds of physical problems. So we shouldn't just concentrate on the money aspect, but the actual, even if you had all the money in the world, you couldn't necessarily buy the kinds of things which are necessary.
And there are steps we can take. With regard to coastal erosion, there is a mitigation called living shorelines. In most cases, the hardened seawalls that you see are exactly the wrong response.
Wow.
Shorelines cause erosion. They eventually fail in the face of erosion at their base, because when the wave energy hits that seawall, we see it go up, but it also goes down. And it goes down across the face of that seawall to the bottom of that seawall and undercuts it, and eventually that seawall will fail. By using what's called living shorelines, where we create transitional zones that are softened, that are allowed to absorb the energy from that wave, both oyster bars with different kind of shoreline vegetation, and most importantly mangroves, which are with mangroves you get a twofer. Not only are they protecting the shoreline, they're also excellent carbon sinks. They're actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere, tying it up in their leaves, and dropping those leaves down into the water below them, and locking up carbon that otherwise would be floating around in the air. So there are a number of things that we could be doing that we are not doing. There are also some things we're proposing to do that we should not do at all.
The natural world is full of carefully balanced systems. The Brazilian rainforest, the rainforest all over the world is an example. And if we're going to be destroying them in the name of human progress, which is somewhat doubtful, and more or less in line with the desire for wealth and profit, well, we've just got to stop. We've got to look at the world we live in and realize that we're part of it.
I'd like to back up just a little bit. 20 to 30 years ago, when when the talk of climate change started to get into the genre, the consensus from the conservatives was it's not happening. We'd see a blizzard hit out in the Midwest or something, and they would just laugh off climate change. Today, everyone acknowledges now, finally, that it's actually happening, because it's indisputable that our average temperatures are increasing, that the ice flows down in Antarctica and the glaciers are all melting and sea level is rising. Now what they're saying is that it's impossible for the human species to have any effect on climate, and it's simply a natural cycle over which we have no control. Therefore, there's no point in doing anything about it. I think our president would assert that. Our former governor, the criminal Rick Scott, would say that. Even though 90% of the climatologists who study this all over the world do assert that, yes, it is caused by the Industrial Revolution and the pumping of billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere and ocean.
We need to make that 99%.
Is that
99.9, yes.
Yeah. Okay. But we still have that issue to deal with, don't we? We still have so many conservatives saying, oh, we're not affecting this. We're just innocent bystanders.
It is a political debate, not really a scientific debate anymore. And the political debate can be traced directly to money that comes from the Koch brothers and the fossil fuel industry. There's no real grassroots behind that. It's all AstroTurf. And it's well-funded AstroTurf, and it's been thoroughly discredited. We know that carbon pollution due to combustion of fossil fuels, for the most part, is what's driving climate change. We know that 4 million people a year die from air pollution due to fossil fuels, 1 million in China and 1 million in India each.
You've got to be kidding me.
No, we know that the fossil fuel fueled cars, automobiles, are putting nanoparticles of aluminum into the atmosphere, which has been linked to Alzheimer's disease. We know that fossil fuel powered vehicles is causing everything from heart attacks to attention deficit disorder in heart attacks in older people, attention deficit or in asthma in our children. It is impacting our health all the way up and down the lines. And that is not even speaking to the sourcing of these fossil fuels, in particular, such as fracking, where we are exposing people to all kinds of carcinogens. We know that the communities where this fracking is going on are hot spots for all kinds of diseases, most particularly affecting the old and the young. It's just not good for us.
Is fracking an activity going on around the Tampa Bay area?
It is not at this time going on in Tampa Bay. There is a bill in the legislature currently, I don't have the citation, that purports to be regulating fracking, but it actually appears that it would be legitimizing what is called acid matrix fracking. In Florida, our geology is different. We don't really support the kind of hydraulic fracking that is done, say, in Pennsylvania or Oklahoma. But Florida can be fracked. There is gas here in the Sunnyland Formation. I believe that's down south around Naples and out into the Everglades. Really? And also there are productive wells up in the Panhandle area now. However, regardless of where it is done or who is doing it, the fact remains that the drilling of natural gas, the extraction of natural gas, the transportation of natural gas, all the things that is done to it before it gets to the point of combustion, there is a release of methane. It's called fugitive methane. This is a greenhouse gas that is 84 to possibly more than 100 times as bad as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And after it's done its damage in the atmosphere as methane, it degrades eventually into carbon dioxide, and it goes on to be a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. When you factor in the impacts of fugitive methane, it is at least about as bad to burn gas as it is to burn coal. Maybe even a little worse.
Wow.
It's up until now, we've largely relied on the industry to tell us how much methane is escaping from their operations. When independent work was done, it found that they were underestimating by about 60% the fugitive methane. Now the Trump administration is proposing that we cut in half the number of inspections that we do of these sites, and that we allow them twice as long to make the repairs when leaks are discovered.
As the Environmental Protection Agency reverts into the Environmental Destructive Agency, well, Trump tells us we can burn beautiful, clean coal. So what's the problem, Kent?
And with the coal, you really get a whole nother category of pollutants that anybody that lives in Apollo Beach can tell you that in addition to the gases that come off, that you also, or the greenhouse gases that you get when you burn methane, or you also have soot and ash that rain down on the adjoining community. Then you have a leftover product of the coal ash that you have to deal with, which doesn't just go away.
But the operative word, clean, is a hoax, isn't it? I mean, I know people who really think there is such thing as clean coal.
Yes,
and it's a hoax.
It is a total myth. There is the only way to have clean coal is to just leave it in the ground.
Yeah, that's the cleanest. I wanted to visit the methane issue for another moment. Methane hydrates are a serious problem because they exist at the bottom of the sea as kind of a rock. It's a kind of a frozen rock, as it were. And what people don't realize is that the bottom of the sea is a very cold place. And as the seas warm up, then some of these methane hydrate rocks will begin to dissolve. They're already dissolving and producing methane gas. And in addition to that, methane is located, as I understand it, in the far northern regions, where in the permafrost of Siberia and Canada, it's higher temperatures are causing those areas to dissolve and contribute more methane. And the more methane that you have, the warmer it gets, and the warmer it gets, the more methane is generated.
This is part of what drives runaway climate change. The methane that you mentioned, the permafrost is very alarming. The estimates of the amount of methane, the impact that it would have if we continue the road we're on, are very great. We also, when we lose our ice caps, we lose the albedo, the reflectiveness of the polar ice caps that would bounce the radiated energy from the sun back up into the sky, one thing leads to another. In terms of sea level rise, the melting glaciers on Greenland and also in Antarctica, as the sea level rises, in particular in Antarctica, as the sea level rises above the ground that is under the Antarctic ice cap, ice that was on shore, now it finds water under it and it starts to float, and as it moves off, it creates it stops holding back the ice that was behind it. So you have a compounding and acceleration going on there. It now rains routinely on the glaciers in Greenland, and that rainwater is percolating down. Similarly, it gets down to the ground that is under the glaciers, where it lubricates, it warms it, it melts it, and it is accelerating the progress of the Greenland ice sheet into the oceans. And all this is happening faster and faster as we go along. We are these are the reasons why the IPCC has given us 12 years to reduce carbon emissions by 30%. Sadly, instead, we are increasing carbon emissions. They had held steady for 3 years. Now they're on their way back up, and we see a real lack of commitment on the part of those who could do the most to slow down our carbon emissions. And by this, I mean, it is terrific that as many people as can go from gasoline-powered cars to electric vehicles. There are any number of things that as individuals we can and should do that will have an impact over time. But this pales in when you compare it to what the really big players are doing. Our power companies in Florida in particular, especially TECO over in Tampa, just don't seem to get it. They they have a 10-year plan that shows a steady increase in greenhouse gases as far as the eye can see. And ironically, Big Bend is located in a site there, which is their largest power station, that is imminently threatened by sea level rise or extreme climate events. Take your pick. And yet, and which they recognize with their plan to build a 20-foot wall. The top of that wall would be 20 feet above sea level to protect the plant and elevate things inside it. The projections for a Category 4 direct hit would bring a 24-foot storm surge, which...
well, that's included in the Project Phoenix report, isn't it? Which I'm going to take a short break to let our listeners know about Atheists of Florida. And then when we come back, let's talk about the Project Phoenix report and what can happen with a major hit from a major hurricane to this area and this very radio station in whose studio we're sitting today here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com.
2:35 on the Tan Talk Radio Network. You're listening to the Atheist Forum. Ed Golly with Jim Peterson. Our guest in studio today, Kent Bailey from the Sierra Club of the Tampa Bay area. A report was generated called the Project Phoenix Report that describes the potential effects of a major hurricane hitting this area, which really hasn't happened since, I think, about 1926 when the storm came
That'd be about right, yes.
8 feet of water in downtown Tampa. It would probably, by comparison to what nature could throw at us these days, be nothing more than a minor weather incident. And, of course, because of the number of people who lived here, right?
Yeah.
And what they lived in and how easy it is to replace a building that's just built out of lumber. You just pick up the pieces and nail them back together and you're back in business. But tell us about Project Phoenix and what it really represents for this area.
Yeah, Project Phoenix was a 2010 report that anticipated, for planning purposes, the impacts of a Category 4 storm on the worst case trajectory coming into the bay. That report makes it pretty plain that Tampa Bay area is a ground zero for the worst climate catastrophe this nation has ever seen, should this eventuality happen.
And that trajectory would be about right where we're sitting right now, right? Anywhere from Clearwater through Tarpon Springs.
It involve a storm approaching from the southwest, driving the water onshore. Would bring a 24-foot storm surge into downtown Tampa.
And Murphy's Law mandates that it will occur co-located with a high tide. It's just automatic. That's what's going to happen.
Yes. So, 50% of the population in this area lives less than 10 feet above sea level. So a 24-foot storm surge in Tampa would be catastrophic. In terms of wind and water damage combined, 2/3 of the homes in Hillsborough County would either be severely impacted or totally destroyed. In Pinellas County, the figure is 90%.
And as I understand it, enough water could literally cut Pinellas County in two. It could just create a water trench between southern and northern Pinellas County.
Yeah, the storm that came through in early back 1920s changed the geography of Pinellas County, and it can be changed again.
Seawalls be damned, right?
Yes, Oldsmar, I think, was the main focus of that earlier hurricane. Practically destroyed the entire town.
Yeah.
Water levels 18 feet above the.
So an event like this would be the most expensive and destructive weather event in the history of the human experience, I presume.
Well, certainly in as far as this nation is concerned. I don't know of anything that has generated that level of destruction as yet. We're seeing, communities have seen 100-year storms strike them 2 or 3 times in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
It's becoming a regular thing, and we can't prevent that. We can reduce our carbon emissions significantly by moving away from fossil fuels into renewable energy, which would be a big step in the forward. But our communities that might be impacted need to prepare for the day after the storm, and we need to every piece of vehicle, everything that the local government has, it has wheels on it, needs to have a plan to get it to higher ground and to safety. We need to have our first responders need to be equipped to stand alone. There will be no grid. There'll be massive power outages that will extend for at least 1 month, 2 months out. From the event. So they need first responders need to have solar panels on their roofs. They need to have battery backup enough to maintain critical services through the nights. And as soon as oh, by the way, these will pay for themselves. Let's hope we never have this storm, okay? And that'd be great. And these solar panels will pay for themselves in the electricity that they replace. And then to all of our shelters, we need to do the same thing. Have solar panels on the roofs and let them produce electricity. Let them save money for the government agency that they belong to in the meantime. And if we need them, they'll be there. Let's hope we never need them.
But Ken, don't you go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was going to say the effect that such a situation would have on this community would be a lot more terrible than most people imagine, because we are very dependent in many communities on what's called the lifter station that lifts the sewage developed by the community and puts it into the main system, which has further pumps along the way, all electrical pumps everywhere. These are powerful motors, and they absorb quite a bit of energy. And at the same time, we also are dependent upon electrical pumps for our water supply, pumping it everywhere. And if all that goes away, water is an essential thing to maintain life of any kind. And you pile that on top of the general lack of electricity for TVs and computers and lights, that sort of thing. We can do without that, but we can't do without water. So I see that this will be a situation that would mandate that people have to move out of the state rather quickly.
I have ongoing argument with my hard-headed son, who is a Marine and quite sure that he can take care of any situation that arises. And I will say to him, I tell him, I say, well, okay, let's assume your house is still standing and everything is whole and you're safe the day after the storm. Now, you've got no water, you've got no sewer, you've got no electricity, the stores don't have any food, you can't go anywhere and get any fuel. Why would you want to be here when you can know it's going to stay like that for weeks, if not months, into the future?
And it's going to be like a Dutch oven in your house, right? Because these things always hit in September. It's going to be hot and humid and miserable.
Yeah.
And you can't even turn on a floor fan.
Anybody want to buy a house?
Well, you need to plan to leave. You really and leave early. I know people that evacuated the last time had their cars full of gas. They started off north. They got as far as that tank of gas would take them. They pulled off the interstate to get more gas and joined dozens and hundreds of other people who were sitting there waiting for gas to come because the gas stations had no gas. You could only get as far as you could get on one tank. That's when you've waited too long. If you wait for that,
Yeah.
this is for the sake of your safety. Your plan needs to be to leave.
But my appraisal of the situation is that as I drive around Pinellas County, I see so many manufactured homes and homes that were built probably they're roughly from the 40s to the 70s that really weren't built to hurricane standards and never really been field tested. So when you have this enormous amount of housing disappear from a storm event, where do these people go? Presumably they'll have enough sense to get to a shelter and survive the storm, but they have no place to go back to live, and FEMA's not going to send down 80,000 trailers for people to live in and have them plugged in and have water and power. Go ahead.
No, well, we really need to look at what happened in New Orleans because, first off, a lot of people lacked the capacity to leave. They could not get out. We need to, make sure that we have a plan to evacuate anybody who cannot get out on their own. We need to seriously prepare for the coming storm. And I think, 2010, we had a lot less people here than we have now. It's just something we really need to look at and seriously prepare for, in addition to preparing, sooner or later, we're going to have to deal with an impact. Eventually, sea level rise is going to be a problem. We know that's coming. Possibly something much worse is coming. We have no idea when that might or might not occur. Yeah. In the meantime, we must insist, and since I'm a TECO customer, I focus on Big Bend. We must insist that our utility companies stop making the situation worse. TECO has proposed that they replace their coal-fired unit number 1 with a gas-fired unit and retire unit number 2 at Big Bend. And a lot of the residents in Palo Beach don't understand why the Sierra Club thinks this is a bad idea. Now, let me make 2 points about that. The first point is that fracked gas is every bit as bad as coal in terms of carbon emissions, okay? So while that means you won't have as much soot on your carport if you live in Apollo Beach, it doesn't do anything for your grandchildren's future to be burning gas instead of coal.
It doesn't mitigate climate change.
Not a bit.
Okay.
The second thing is TECO put out a statement on May the 24th of last year where they announced proudly that they were going to be going from 24% coal as a source of their power to 12% coal. Well, that sounds a lot like they're going to be cutting coal burning by half. But they picked a very specific data point on that when they looked at forward and said we're going from 24 down to 12. If you look at their 10-year plan, which you can find online at Public Service Commission, if you Google TECO 10-year plan or Tampa Electric Company 10-year plan, look at the 10-year plan for TECO. You'll see a whole page of all the 10-year plans for all the utilities. And look at Schedule 5. I think it's on page 63 of that plan. You will see that by the year 2027, they plan to be right back where they are today in terms of coal combustion. In 2019, they plan to burn slightly more than 1.5 million tons of coal. I wish I had the number for you. I sat down and figured out what that meant in terms of how much coal per minute and per second that is. It's incredible. This is not 1.5 million pounds, 1.5 million tons of coal. And yes, at that low point, they're going to be down to about 550,000 tons. But by 2027, they're right back up to more than 1.5 million tons of coal. So all those people in Apollo Beach that think coal is going away at Big Bend have got a real serious disappointment coming. TECO does not plan to get rid of the coal burning at Big Bend, not at all.
This brings up solar panels. TECO has been noted in the past for its decidedly progressive attitude when it comes to putting up large farms of solar panels. I've seen some of them. They're very big, and they generate a fairly good amount of energy. Why isn't TECO continuing to pursue that? Is it because they're getting resistance from landowners and so forth who feel that large numbers of solar panels somehow threaten their property values and other considerations?
Yeah, they have a plan that will bring them up to 7% photovoltaics in the next 2 or 3 years.
That sounds pretty weak.
Well, if they were to keep going, it wouldn't be so bad. But after that, it levels off and declines because solar panels lose a little bit of their capacity over time. They have some on the drawing boards. When they've installed that, they have no plans to go beyond that.
Wow.
And that's really sad. When I got involved with this, I started doing research and looking around the country at what other places are doing. TECO is planning additional gas-fired plants to go into Big Bend in 2021, 2023. They're not done. This is not the end of them using frack gas, which they say, they're not responsible for what happens as far as fugitive methane goes, which is, I don't know, it's like an ivory dealer not being responsible for dead elephants. But setting that aside for a moment, across the country, from California to New York, from Arizona to Minnesota, there is example after example after example of utilities that are retiring coal-fired plants, retiring gas-fired plants, and replacing them with renewable, including solar, and battery backup. And every case they're doing it because it saves the ratepayers money. I can't understand why a solar installation in Vermont or Minnesota, solar plus battery saves ratepayers money, and it won't work in Florida. I just don't understand how that could possibly be true.
Not enough sunshine, perhaps. But here's another thought, too. The TECO service area is in a coastal region where there is a large body of water, the Gulf of Mexico. And what happens, why aren't they exploiting the possible use of wave energy or
Wind
tidal
turbines?
energy? Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's work is moving forward on that, mostly actually on the East Coast. As it happens, the Gulf Stream runs stronger, closer to shore along the East Coast, and projects are being developed now to harness the energy of the Gulf Stream. There are challenges, of course. You have to worry about fouling and marine organisms growing on the blades and so forth. You have to worry about keeping it in place. You have to be able to get the power from the turbine to the shore. but it shows a lot of promise going forward. The Gulf Stream being slow and strong, and water is so much denser than air. When you're powering a wind turbine, you need a lot of velocity in order to get enough energy to spin those blades and create the electricity. When you're dealing with water, you don't need the velocity because you've got so much more mass. And so the energy is in the mass, the weight of the water. So it turns at a much slower pace, but it has a huge amount of force. And there's a lot of promise in that. The thing is, if you are investing $1 billion, which I think the book value of this project now is $865 million. But as anyone who's ever hired anybody to build anything knows, we'll be lucky if we get out of that for $1 billion. You put $1 billion into a plant that runs on gas, you're going to be using that plant for the next 30 years. You have to, in order to get the money back out of it. The only reason we have cheap gas now is because in 2005, Dick Cheney created what's called the Halliburton loophole in the Cheney energy bill, which made gas and oil exploration and development the only industries in America, the only ones that are exempt from key provisions of Clean Air, Clean Water, and Safe Drinking Water Acts that were signed into law by Richard Nixon. Okay, in a country that prides itself on being, free enterprise, marketplace doing its job. Let's have competition on a level playing field. These are the only two. Gas and oil are the only two energy industries that have these exemptions. Without those, and at the time in 2005, we didn't have fracking. We didn't know what fracking was doing.
Wow.
Now, I can guarantee you that going forward, this is going to be changed. The consequences of fracking are so severe and are hurting so many people so badly. There are going to be restrictions put into place. These restrictions are going to impact the price of gas going forward. It is never again going to be as cheap as it is now. It is probably going to be a lot more expensive. And that's not even considering the possibility that we have a carbon tax or some other sort of market mechanism to actually account for the damage that is done when you burn fossil fuels. I'm only talking about the fracked gas side of it, where they've permitted fracking to be done in a way that is hazardous and harmful to the people in that area. The price of natural gas is going to go up. The ratepayers of TECO are going to pay that price. It doesn't matter what it is. We're going to have to pay that price going forward. You're signing a 30-year mortgage, basically, to pay off with fracked gas, regardless of the cost. It's going to be a bad deal for the ratepayers. TECO can't lose, okay? They're guaranteed to make their money no matter what. It's a win-win proposition for them. It's a lose-lose proposition for the ratepayers.
And that's what confounds me. If we spent the same amount of money putting solar panel arrays out in the part of Florida that Mosaic is turning into a wasteland, we would never have a fuel cost issue associated with getting power from them. So why not put the money into that and be done with it? And not only that, but it's clean.
It is
because they aren't guaranteed a profit on any of that.
Well,
they're going to make as much money.
They actually would make. They would make their compensation. It's capital investment. They get a rate of return based on their capital investment. But like so many business people, TECO has operated coal plants for a long, long time. They know how to do this profitably, and they're just not comfortable doing something new. Unfortunately, we're living in an age where we're going to have to move out of our comfort zone if we're going to give our grandchildren any kind of prospects for a future.
We can almost be guaranteed to be moved out of our comfort zone no matter what.
That's a fact.
Yes, and I think, too, that no matter where a catastrophic event occurs, like a major hurricane, whether it's here or Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, one major event, I think, is going to really shake sense into Floridians who are going to realize they don't, even if they weren't affected by it, they don't want to be affected by it in the future. Already, a lot of retirees are thinking, I want to get out of Florida, and potential retirees are thinking, I'm not going to stay here and go through that. I'm going to move into regions that aren't susceptible to that, meaning that at some point, and probably not in the very distant future, Florida's going to start to see a negative population curve and people moving out, which is going to mean it's going to be even harder to support these power stations and the infrastructure that we're putting in, always based on the idea of eternal and perpetual growth.
The only prospect I can see for attracting people to Florida would be if we actually undertake a serious effort to install renewable energy in Florida, which, by the way, will create 500,000 new jobs. With the average rate for solar installers now being $26 an hour, 2/3 of which only have a high school degree, 28% of the solar workforce is female, 24% are minority, 9% are veterans. The transition to renewable energy will be the greatest economic boon to the state of Florida since the invention of air conditioning. That might bring a few people back.
And what if we're wrong and we clean up the environment for nothing? Right?
Wouldn't that be terrible?
Yes. Well, Kent, I'll give you the final word here because we're almost out of time here on the Atheist Forum. What would you like our listeners to know?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me be here. And I would remind everybody that the Sierra Club has 3.5 million members worldwide. We are
one
the
of them.
We have 19,000 members and supporters on the Tampa Bay group, and that only includes Hillsborough County and the eastern portions of Hillsborough and Hernando County. We're the oldest, largest, and most litigious environmental group in the world. Our motto is explore, enjoy, and protect the planet, which is why we are litigious. We're not afraid to go to court when we have to.
The trouble is with the courts all leaning toward the conservative judges who seem to focus on the profits of industry instead of the health and welfare of the citizens. I wonder how litigation is going to save us.
But whether you think of yourself as being red party or blue party, remember to vote green.
There you
All
go.
times.
Progress impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything, from George Bernard Shaw. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to our guest, Kent Bailey, chairman of the Tampa Bay Sierra Club, for being with us here on the Atheist Forum. Hope you'll join us again next week here on the Tan Talk Radio Network for another edition of the program. Now, along with Jim Peterson, I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.
WTAN Clearwater,
FM 106.1,
WDCF Dade City,
FM 102.
And at that time, they were very proud of the fact that they stabilized our aquifer 40-some feet below historic norms.